is the 2014 Audi RS5, featuring a naturally aspirated 4.2-liter V8. Couple that with an 8,250 RPM Redline, and this is a thrill that you're not seeing in today's world. I'm Alex, your host, and join me for test drive Audi RS5. For this test drive, we have one fairly straightforward question for this Audi RS5. In an era of hyper turbocharged and overly computerized modern cars, can this naturally aspirated 4.2-liter V8 that powers the RS5 deliver still an exhilarating driving experience? Join me for test drive Audi RS5.
Quick note up front here. Occasionally throughout the video, you'll hear my mic go in and out. It didn't handle filming in the upper 30s and rain quite as well as the Audi did, so my apologies ahead of time.
The 4.2-liter V8 underneath the hood of this RS5 puts out 450 horsepower and 317 pound-feet of torque. When you talk performance numbers for this vehicle, of course it's going to be impressive. Now, being a little torque lean, it does have a 0 to 60 at 4.5 seconds, which may be a little bit slower compared to modern sports cars, but it definitely does have a high top speed. Ironically, if you were to ask me what my favorite feature is on the RS5 feature, and it's nothing technology, as a matter of fact, it's basically the opposite. It is brute force. Let me show you. It's that 8,250 RPM Redline, and I can't stress to you how astronomically high on a V8 8,250 RPM cutoff is. You basically don't see anything like that out of a V8 unless you're looking at something like the M3 of this similar era, or something even more like a Ferrari. This thing screams all the way up to that Redline and is by far my favorite feature, even if it doesn't have any technology behind it. It's just pure brute force. An interesting tidbit about the V8 that powers the RS5. It's a 4.2-liter V8, which is actually the same size that you find in the V8 powered R8. But they're not the same engine. As a matter of fact, they are almost completely a different engine. The 4.2-liter V8 powering the RS5 is actually the superior of the two, because the R8 and its V8 actually is underpowered compared to this. Audi basically says what they did when they made this V8 was chop 2 blocks off the V10 that powers the R8, and that's essentially how you ended up with this 4.2-liter V8. As I start to hit some rain here in the beautiful Pacific Northwest, one of the things that definitely is a hallmark of Audi is the Quattro all-wheel drive, and you're going to be reassured that all 450 horsepower and 317 pound-feet of torque of the RS5 make it to the street via 4 wheels. It does have a rear-wheel drive bias, 40% up front, 60% in the rear under normal circumstances, so should you want to get a little squirrely with the back wheels, this does have the power to do it, but otherwise, as far as trying to get grip, you're going to be comforted that all 4 wheels are receiving that power. Let's talk stopping power for the Audi RS5. There's nothing overly fancy here, no carbon ceramic brake option, but what you do get is a very solid pair of rotors, 14.4 inches up front, 12.8 in the rear, ventilated and cross-drilled, with some unique design features behind it. The rotors themselves are actually a wavy shape pattern instead of a typical cylinder shape like you would see on most rotors, and Audi's whole intent with that was to better disperse heat and reduce brake fatigue. This is a great set of brakes, perfect for this vehicle, and is exactly what you'd need with nothing furthermore. Let's talk transmissions, and that may be the one area that the little brother S5 actually has an advantage over this car, the RS5. Why is that? Well, the S5 is available with either a 6-speed manual transmission or this exactly same 7-speed S-tronic transmission that Audi puts out. The RS5 only comes with that automatic 7-speed transmission. It's a dual clutch automatic. It's really great for this vehicle, but of course, it's now been over almost 2 decades since we've had a manual transmission in an RS powered vehicle, and that's very disappointing.
Audi's standard drive mode select system is dial operated and lets you choose between 3 different modes as well as a personalized mode. On the most plush side is comfort, most aggressive being dynamic. Auto, of course, will let the computer choose between the two, or you can customize it to your liking under individual. The components affected under these settings are throttle mapping, steering feel, transmission shift points, the loudness of the active exhaust, and how playful essentially you want the wheel spin to get with the sport differential before intervention.
Now, I will make one disclaimer about the exhaust notes. As I've stated before, I like to test drive cars and bring them on this channel as close to stock as possible. Why? Because you can do a lot of things with custom modifications that kind of deliver a different driving experience. But for the majority of folks, you're going to encounter a stock vehicle, and the stock experience is what I want to describe. So, one disclaimer.
This RS5 came with an aftermarket Akrapovic exhaust.
It's a quad exhaust. It sounds fantastic, but really it's not a major enhancement over the stock RS5's exhaust, because the thing that makes that sound system is the 4.2 liter V8, and of course that's consistent across this vehicle whether you have an exhaust or not. One more thing about the exhaust notes here. This does have one of the early setups of active exhaust. There are flaps within the exhaust system that remain closed at lower speeds, but open up the further you get up that tachometer towards the 8,250 RPM Redline that really let this exhaust breathe. And obviously, you can hear every bit of that as you're on the throttle. Let's talk suspension. So both in the front and rear, there is an independent link suspension with additional stability brought to you by anti-roll bars on both the front and the back. No matter which way you dice it, it is a very comfortable, competent, and stable ride that the RS5 brings you. And when you see a pothole or come upon a speed bump, it's nothing that you need to prepare for or brace for. This thing's gonna handle it really nicely. When it comes to the interior of the RS5, very identical to the S4 that we drove over a decade later, especially when you think of its initial design. I still think it's very timeless for what it gives you. A lot of buttons instead of anything screen operated. There is a bit of a cluster going on here, but if you can deal with the Audi MMI Infotainment system, which does take some getting used to, it's a pretty decent interior. I think the seats, they're hella comfy. They look a little bit like gaming chairs and still look pretty cool to this day. All in all, I think even though it's a decade plus old, the interior of this car still holds up well over time. Comparing the interior of this vehicle to the S4, the 4-door version, you really didn't lose that much space by sacrificing 2 doors. Really, I think the look of this vehicle is better than the 4-door version, even if that is probably a more reasonable for day-to-day accommodations. But I think if you're gonna have a sports car, you're probably willing to sacrifice a few things, and losing 2 doors wasn't much of a sacrifice, especially when it comes to the looks of the RS5.
Speaking of back seats, really it's not spacious, but not any more cramped for passengers in the back of the RS5 compared to other competitors' coupes. Honestly, I think you might even have a bit more legroom in the RS5 than you had in the 4-door CT4V Blackwing that we previously tested.
For some reason, should you want to listen to the audio system instead of that exhaust, the Audi RS5 features the same exact 14-speaker, 505-watt Bang & Olufsen sound system that we heard in the Audi S4. It's a terrific system, great bass, great clarity, and is definitely something that you find on a higher-end vehicle. But why would you want to listen to speakers instead of that? One of the options this RS5 came equipped with was the driver assist package, which, just as you would expect, adds a few safety features, adaptive cruise control, blind spot monitoring, but also the enhancement of what they call dynamic steering. Essentially, at lower speeds, an electronic motor is fine-tuned to help with maneuverability. So basically, you get a little bit more of an enhanced steering experience and is a worthwhile upgrade. When you look inside the RS5, it is lit up by this gigantic, beautiful, oversized sunroof that lets in a lot of natural light, and I absolutely love. The best part is, of course, when you go to open it fully, it creates an open air experience. Actually, no, it doesn't, because that is as far open as this sunroof gets on this era of the RS5, and for that matter, the A5 platform as a whole. When Audi designed this vehicle, they put in a sunroof that was so big that it actually did not fit with retracting on this vehicle. So the best you're gonna get is a tilt, and I think that was a complete miss. I'm not a very big convertible guy, and this is available in convertible, but I love, on a nice day, opening the sunroof, getting that fresh air in, and Audi completely missed the case by just making a tilt-only sunroof in this vehicle. Whereas when you look at something like the C63 AMG, one of its direct competitors, every one of those vehicles has a fully retractable, full-length sunroof. So I'm missing my book. One of the things that I'm picking up on driving the RS5 is that it's a very loud, noisy environment inside. And I know, obviously you have the good noise, but it's also noisy from a road noise, tires, other things going on in the environment standpoint, and that's a little surprising. I know this vehicle's over a decade old, soundproofing's come a long ways, but probably BMW and Mercedes, even during this period, had better soundproofing advantages over this RS5. But if you want to drown it out,
caution, speed camera ahead.
Oh God, not what we want. Maybe a surprise, but just one of the small things that adds up in the RS5 and as well as the S5 is the steering wheel here. It just fits you like a glove, really, no matter the size of your hands. You have the flat bottom rim here with the RS5 logo. Within reach, of course, on the steering wheel, you have your paddle shifters. Now, these are aftermarket paddle shifters. I don't love them, but even the stock ones work just fine and are within perfect reach. It really isn't a huge factor, but when you think about all the things that the designers initially got right when they made and designed this RS5, it's those little things along with, of course, that V8 that add up to an exceptional driving experience. Let's talk exterior styling of the RS5. It's very smooth, round, I think good looking, but not a major departure from the S5. I really think that the RS5 in 2 doors, obviously compared to the RS4, S4, I think it looks better than the 4-door version, more sleek. The lines are very round, nothing too obtuse. But really when you look at this, It's almost like a bodybuilder hidden under a suit. It's very unassuming. I mean, there are a couple aerodynamic touches, but unless you're looking at the badges, you really don't know that this is a hell of a sports car. You really don't know what's hiding underneath this hood. It's a 4.2 liter V8, and I like the fact that you're able to kind of blend in with traffic, at least in the black on black setup, maybe a little less if you get the red paint. I said this for the S4 and it absolutely goes true for the RS5 as well. Name somebody with a better headlight game than Audi. I really think that even going back over a decade, they had some of the best lights in the game, and that still remains true to today. And I think these still hold up really well against cars that are being produced today when it comes to the headlights. So one of the things that the RS5 has that the S5 didn't is a electronically deployable automatic spoiler. When the RS5 hits a speed over 70 miles an hour, the automatic ducktail spoiler in the back will deploy, giving a little bit of extra aerodynamics to the vehicle. And one more thing on the spoiler, by pressing this button right here, you can actually manually deploy that spoiler even if you're not at 70 miles an hour. Let's talk competition for the 4.2 liter V8 RS5. I think of two vehicles specifically, the 4.0 liter V8 powered E92 M3 and the 6.2 liter V8 powered W204 C63 AMG. Why? Well, they all kind of had the same vibe at the same time within those eras. All of them came with gigantic, naturally aspirated V8s. All came with either a 2-door or a 4-door option. Now, granted, the M3 was the only one that came with a manual transmission, but the C63 and, of course, this RS5 came with an automatic. All of them had amazing soundtracks, and now all of those subsequent cars use some sort of turbocharged engine. Actually, the C-Series doesn't even use a V8 or a V6 anymore. It only comes with a 4-cylinder. So when you think about some of those best days of cars of this era, I definitely think the C63, the M3, and the RS5 fit hand in hand, even though you could probably put in a few different cars within that comparison. When you look at the engines amongst those three cars and the power output, it's really not too dissimilar for three naturally aspirated V8s. The BMW with the smallest engine of the three, featuring a 4.0 liter naturally aspirated V8, had 414 horsepower, but only 295 pound-feet of torque. Both figures this outperforms. Go on the opposite side though, the Mercedes C63 and its 6.2 liter V8 could get all the way up to 481 horsepower with an optional package, and always came with 443 pound-feet of torque, a very healthy number compared to the M3 or the RS5. Finally, turning to the RS5 and its 4.2 liter V8, it sits squarely in the middle of the C63 and the M3, even though it edges a little bit more towards the M3 in torque. You have the 4.2 liter V8 that makes 450 horsepower, 31 less than the C63, but when you get to torque, it is a pretty big step down to 317 pound-feet of torque, as we've talked about. When you have a smaller V8 like the 4.0 liter on the M3 or the 4.2 liter here, they're going to be a little lean on torque, even if you could squeeze a little bit more horsepower out of it. The benefit of that, they are super high revving and super rewarding to get all the way up to that red line. Let's talk the model lineup for this era of S5, RS5. At the very base level, you have to decide between whether you want 2 doors or 4 doors for this platform of vehicle. If you wanted the 2-door, you went with the A5 platform. If you wanted the 4-door, you went with the A4 platform. Now, each one of those platforms has 3 different variants. You have the base level, which is just denoted as A4, A5, or you have the sportier versions in the S4 and S5. And of course, one of our test drive videos was this 6-speed manual S4 that we called one of the most underrated daily drivers of all time. Now, sitting at the very top of that performance chain has always been the RS4 and RS5. So for this era of RS5, you had the option of choosing either between the two-door coupe that you see here or a two-door convertible. In my opinion, even though I do like the open air and being able to experience a little more about what's going on around you, I think that the two-door coupe's just so much better looking. If it had a functional sunroof that would actually open and slide back all the way, you would get everything that I need to get out of an open-air car anyways, so coupe's probably the way to go if you're asking me. And you see some evidence that the RS5 Coupe is the more popular. If you go to look at used vehicles now available for sale, generally you're seeing a slight discount on the convertibles or maybe a slight premium on the coupes, and that's just an interesting thing to know. The RS badge on this vehicle denotes that it is the top performance trim of the lineup that we just went through. After all, the 450 horsepower in this vehicle exceed the 333 made by the S5 by over 117 horsepower. That's a considerable margin. But when you look at torque, you may actually be surprised is that at 317 pound-feet of torque, it's relatively torque lean. Now, when you look at the V6 supercharged version of the little brother of this vehicle, the S5, it actually has 8 more torque at 325 pound-feet of torque, and that's not usually a dynamic that you see. A performance vehicle higher up on the food chain actually trailing in power measurement to its V6 lower trim sibling. For my V8 enthusiasts out there that believe that we definitely lost something as we've gone to more EVs and even turbocharged or supercharged V6s, I have one silver lining for you that's in this vehicle. This RS5, the 2014 RS5, V8 powered, naturally aspirated, it is still the most powerful RS5 ever produced as far as horsepower is concerned. After all, the 444 horsepower that's currently made by the 2.9 liter V6 in the RS5 for sale right now still trails this thing by 6 horsepower. Of course, when you switch to a 2.9 liter twin turbo V6, torque is going to be readily available. So the new RS5 does outperform this by far on torque, but again, you don't get that same revs, and this vehicle has more horsepower than that one does stock. So another win for the V8s. So what are some of the positives of the Audi RS5? My first positive for this vehicle is this screaming 8,250 RPM Redline that you can push this V8 all the way up to. Look, this 4.2 liter V8 rewards you when you ring it out. It wants you to work its way all the way up to Redline rather than something like a turbocharged engine where you maybe get a little bit of a turbo kick in halfway. This thing is super linear. It's got a very smooth delivery, and it is rewarding to chase that tachometer all the way up to Redline every single time. And it's something that I just don't think you're going to ever see again out of an Audi. After all, they're getting more EV, of course, and eco with superchargers and turbochargers, so that naturally aspirated scream is truly a bygone era. Another positive for this RS5 is just how stable everything is. Now, obviously, this has the Quattro all-wheel drive by Audi, but really, it is just the smooth delivery of everything. You can get it to fishtail if you want to, but when you stomp on it, all that power is just perfectly and linearly applied to the wheels. This is just a very refined car, even though it's got a lot of raw components underneath it. Another positive, the absolute symphony that comes out the back pipes of the RS5. Now, I know the exhaust isn't a stock soundtrack here, but just go ahead and YouTube any stock RS5 V8 exhaust. It sounds phenomenal without any alteration. It is an amazing combination of a high revving V8 and a phenomenal naturally aspirated exhaust soundtrack. And again, it's just one of those things that you had to be there for that era. There will not be vehicles that sound that way in today's day and age. Even with EVs now doing some shady stuff, putting speakers on EVs to duplicate sound, No computer's ever going to replicate what this thing does naturally. We're never going to see another era where you have 3 German supercars, all with naturally aspirated V8. On the other hand, what are some of the drawbacks or potential negatives of the Audi RS5? One of my first negatives comes with the sunroof in the Audi RS5 and S5. I think despite the curvature of this vehicle, the fact that it's only a tilt sunroof instead of a fully retractable sunroof like you would see in its competitor, the C63 AMG of the same era, I think that that's just a miss. There's no way that you couldn't have figured out how to do a retractable sunroof, let a little bit more light in, let a little bit more air in, like you had figured out with the 4-door version of this vehicle, the Audi S4 and RS4 for that matter. Another negative, and this has been consistent with the S4 that we test drove, is the Audi MMI Infotainment system that controls everything going on within the vehicle. I've said it before, it's just a cluster. And it's not very simple, it's very layered to go through, takes a lot of time getting used to, and I still don't know if I can find everything that I need to quickly within that menu. The one positive that comes with that is that a lot of this vehicle still is button controlled on the inside instead of a touchscreen control. So pretty much what you're looking for, you can find fairly simply as long as it has a button. One negative certainly you could say about the RS5 of this era, and even more so of the M3 of that era, they're very torque lean. While these engines both produce a great deal of horsepower, you're just not getting that same amount of torque that you would have out of a bigger V8 like the C63 AMG. And there are instances where you can feel that lack of torque. You have to work this vehicle all the way up to the tachometer to get the most out of it. But don't get me wrong, that actually is a really rewarding experience and one of the reasons why you would buy this car. So yes, it's torque lean as a negative, but I think that's just something that you accept when you get such exceptional 4.2 liter V8. Now to answer the question we started with. In an era of hyper turbocharged cars and overly computerized vehicles, can this over decade old naturally aspirated V8 still deliver a compelling performance enthusiast experience? My answer is an old school hell yes. Everything about this car is super smooth and linear. There is nothing erratic or jittery about it like you kind of see with the turbocharged engines in the M4 competition or even the CT4V Blackwing. All of those had a bunch of turbo lag and want to shoot out from underneath you when you get on it. Maybe it's the all-wheel drive, maybe it's the fact that you have to rev up the 4.2 liter V8 to get all of the 317 pound-feet of torque and 450 horsepower out of it. But this car is just a smooth beast. Everything about it is very linear. Everything it delivers is super smooth. And I appreciate the hell out of it because out the back, it's an absolute circus with the sounds that it produces. I also like the fact that when you look at this visually, nothing really jumps out at you. This is not the same car coming down the road as the R8, right? Like you're not getting Tony Stark looks in this vehicle. Really, when the exhaust goes quiet, you can kind of blend in with traffic at highway speeds. Really, there's nothing sticking out that's going to make you a cop magnet, and at least in the black on black configuration that we have here. This car does a great job of being a gentleman. It rips up the road when you want it to, and then can blend in, wear a suit and tie when you need it to. And maybe that'll just keep a couple points off your license. So what do you think? What did I get right? What did I get wrong? What was your favorite feature about the Audi RS5? Thank you for watching Test Drive Audi RS5. This is the 6th in our test drive series of videos on this channel. Our whole goal on this channel is to get our hands on cars like the Audi RS5. Because in an increasingly turbocharged and even EV-driven world, experiences like this are becoming less and less commonplace. Because face it, the 4.2 liter V8 that sits under this hood is already extinct. The era where the C63, the RS5, and the M3 came with V8s naturally aspirated out of Germany is long gone. So our mission on this channel is to try and find cars like the RS5 and get our hands on them while we can. Those cars that deliver a performance enthusiast experience. If you enjoyed this video, it would mean the world to me if you hit like. And if you think we're doing a good job and want to see more videos like this, hit subscribe because we're going to be trying to get our hands on vehicles like this, and I'd love for you to join on the ride. If you made it to the end of the video, we appreciate the hell out of you. I'm Alex, your host, and join me on the next test drive.